Welcome back to Elevated Outdoors. I'm Quentin. Today I want to introduce myself a little bit more into detail and give you a little bit of backstory. You may be asking, who is this guy I've, found on YouTube, and why should I listen to him? Or what is the reason behind this journey for him? So I want to start out with giving a little bit of my testimonial. And as we've heard, I started out as a child, going to all the youth groups. Every Sunday I was picked up by one of the ladies from the church who had a 15-passenger van or whatever, and we'd drive around and pick up other kids, and we'd go to Sunday school, and we would hear the stories and play games and all the things that maybe some of our kids are doing if we have them in church. That grew into my teenage years. I would start going to summer camps, whether they were day camps starting out or became week-long camps. I did the archery, the swimming, all the fun things. Sure, every day we'd have Bible study time or worship time, and that was a lot of kids' upbringing if they are at all into the church. My parents didn't go to church very often. I remember my dad doing devotionals pretty much every day. Didn't really understand what he was doing. I had a understanding, but not a deep understanding of it. My mom actually is the daughter of a Pentecostal preacher, but by the time I was born, my grandpa had quit preaching, and my mom was raising a family, right? So she didn't have the time, sometimes working 2 different jobs, to go to church the way I'm sure she would like. Sure, we'd go on Easter Sundays, or we would all go, Christmas Eve services and whatnot. But fast forward to my more adult years, I stopped going to church probably somewhere around when I was 17, 18 maybe, and I started to go into community college and getting a job and filling my life and my schedule with other priorities at the time. I met my wife and we've had 3 beautiful, perfect children, and we wanted to start their life out so we got them baptized. It's what you're supposed to do. My grandparents were kind of a little bit pressuring us to do that, but I personally did it on my own accord. My wife, who isn't as spiritual, kind of went along with it and understood. So my kids, as they grew older, they started to go to church. they went very often with my sister, their aunt, and they would go to church, and they were in all the programs, and we'd go to church and watch them sing, and they did the Awanas program, and all the things. And somewhere in there, around 2019, 18, 19, my dad got sick. As his health declined and he got closer and closer to passing away, he ended up going into the hospice program. Thankfully, that program he was only in that program for about a week, where the massive decline happened. But I remember that day very vividly, that my dad admitted, or disclosed, I guess. I won't say it's admitting, because he never really lied to us, but he opened up and said that he had struggled with depression. And that hit me very hard, because that's something that I've struggled with for years prior. My dad, who passed away at 72, never disclosed that to me, and I kind of feel like we could have worked through things together. Had someone who understood what we were going through. With that being said, my dad passed away August 2nd of 2021, and that was, at the time, the biggest setback in my life. Up to that point, I'd lost a couple grandparents, but no one as impactful as my dad. Out of our five siblings, I was arguably the closest with my dad. So that loss really hurt. And with that, my dad kind of taught, I don't know if he intentionally taught me this, but I learned or decided to not let his passing not mean nothing, I guess. Beyond the loss of a parent, I didn't want it to mean nothing. At that time, me and my wife started a Facebook group. We really started working on bettering our mental health. We got into counseling, both of us, therapy, and we started to focus on personal development. We started following podcasts and just different things, and we started to focus on and work on becoming the best versions of ourselves, physically, mentally, spiritually, financially, and emotionally. In them next few years, we went through a lot of changes, and my mom's health started to decline. My mom my family moved in, so between my mom passing away and my dad passing away, through the process of working on our mental health and becoming better versions of ourselves. We created a pretty stress-free life, minus one thing for me, and that was a career of 13 years where I had become head of operations and took on a lot of responsibility, and I had gotten to the point where I was stress-free, anxiety-free, and pretty cool, calm, and collective about every area of my life except for the one thing that brought me the most stress at the time was this career. I talked to my boss about it and disclosed that I was very stressed and struggling mentally through the workload, I guess. And he is a very strong spiritual influence in my life, and kind of caught me off guard when he solved my problem by unexpectedly letting me go from the company. That was a hard hit. Not only have I, at this point, lost my job, wasn't sure I was going to take care of my kids, my wife and kids, but I was also in a position at this employer where I lived on site at work and managed the property. So now we were out of house, a job, seemed like everything, even down to my cell phone. You know, it seemed silly, but at the time it seemed so big. We weren't in a position to really buy a house, you know. We had gotten better with our finances and felt more comfortable, but weren't really in the area to take that step. Unfortunately, during that time, my mom's health started to decline, and thankfully aunt and uncle took us in. Otherwise, we were going to be virtually homeless, you know. My mom's house wasn't set up for a family of 5 to move back home, and we didn't have anywhere to go. So my uncle really stepped up and helped us out and allowed us to move in with him. I think we lived with him for close to 6 months. And in that 6 months, we started to help my mom more and more and more. She actually had to quit her job. She was kind of also somewhat forced out because of her health, and they did a remodel, and after the remodel, the scale of her work was larger and they needed a more full-time position to do what she had previously been doing. Long story long, my mom was out of a job. She was getting Social Security, but you know how that goes. It's, you know, not a whole lot. So after 6 months of living with my uncle, we started to, mainly through the winter, when spring broke, we started to remodel at my mom's. She had area of the house that was unfinished, and we've been slowly working to develop that mainly to give her a living quarters that was on a main floor where she didn't have to do the stairs. She was on oxygen. They were very hard for her to do. And we moved in with her and started to help my mom. And taking care of my mom in her last few months. I guess we lived with her for close to a year before her health really started to decline. She went into the hospital on her 73rd birthday, I believe, and she unfortunately never came home. She wasn't able to, she was no longer going to be able to take care of herself, and she needed a series of heart surgeries that, after one failed attempt, the following two are going to be much more invasive. Just to, you know, my mom was very spiritual, and she had come to terms. She knew what was going to happen. She worked in the medical field for years, and she was more in tune with where she was physically than anybody, you know, and not anybody, but myself especially. We were told that without these surgeries, my mom probably wouldn't make it past a couple days. And that's the route that she, along with myself and siblings of mine and of my mother's, decided to do. We lost my mom on March 4th of last year. There's a lot of significance in the years between when my dad passed away and my mom passed away. There was an address, my parents' address. They bought the property, they built on the property, they created a home for me and my siblings on this property. And before my dad's passing, it was nothing more than mom and dad's address, you know. After dad passed away, I knew this property was his passion, and we've all heard of angel numbers or signs that people, our loved ones who pass, will give us, whether it's, you know, butterflies or, you know, rainbows. We just read about in the Bible how, you know, God told Noah that his covenant to him was going to be signified by a rainbow, and that kind of special. But after my dad passed away, their 4-digit address came up all the time. Came up silly times, whether it was playing a game and my score, or sometimes I didn't mean as much, where I would look at, you know, a gauge that changed and I happened to catch it at that 4-digit number and just give you a little smile like, hey Dad, I see you, you know. The most influential time, couple of the most influential times, was after the loss of my job. I was off work for a couple months, and mind you, this job I was at and I just lost is a career of 13 years. We brought all of our kids home to the house that we lived in on that site. Lots of stuff had changed, you know. It was a real taxing time in my life, and remarkably, I was able to stay positive through all of it. I was what some would describe as unapologetically positive. Almost so positive that, like, it annoyed some people, and that's okay. Some of my closest friends asked me, "What are you gonna do?" And all I could tell them is, "I don't know. I'll figure it out. I always do." And they were worried for me. I was worried for myself, behind the facade, I guess, I was putting on. And a friend of mine asked me, or told me, "Hey, my job's hiring. I'll put in a good word for you. Stop in and talk to my boss." He told me this right after I lost my job. I took a few months off, and my boss, who let me go, like I said, was a very strong spiritual influence in my life, and I'm still in contact with him. There was a lot of remorse when it first happened. Kind of like, I thought you cared about me. I thought we grew into a family, a work family, And what I see now is, by him letting me go, he was looking at the bigger picture and wanted to relieve me of my stress, and he did so gracefully with a severance package, and that allowed me to take a few months off and care for my family and figure some things out with life. After a couple month hiatus and picking up some side jobs here and there with my uncle, who I was living with, and doing a little bit of work at my mom's house and trying to better that situation, her living situation, I kind of went into my friend's shop where he worked to shut him up. I heard a couple times a week, "Hey, have you stopped in and talked to the boss yet?" So I did it on a basically a whim. I didn't expect anything out of it. And lo and behold, I did a little interview, and the next day I was called back and, "Can you start Monday?" "All right, sure." The job that I do, you may have seen yesterday, in yesterday's video, had a shirt from a union with a union logo on it. I started working in a shop, which I told myself for the 13 years, little insight what my previous job was, is I ran a tree nursery. It was a dream job. I always wanted to do landscaping, and I told myself I'm never going to work in a shop. I can't do it. I have to be outside, have to be outside. It's what I always knew. Well, I started to go to this shop every day, and to join a union, you have to pass an apprenticeship test, and you have to go to school for 4 years, our particular union, and turn out as a journeyman. I say I took a pay cut because of what I was making at my previous job was considerably less than what I was making at the new one to start. However, remember, I was off work for a couple months, so it was a pay cut, but it wasn't a pay cut at the current time. So I was nervous and scared and a horrible test taker and just didn't do well in school. I didn't have the focus for it. I learned more hands-on, and the book work and classroom setting just wasn't my cup of tea. I literally scraped by with a bare minimum, and not something I'm proud of, but just wasn't good in school. So taking this test, which I had heard horror stories of people failing multiple times, I kind of went into it thinking, I'm gonna try my best, but after all the studying, I wasn't super confident. I went into it, I was plugging away at it, and with about 10 minutes left to go in the time slot they gave us, I kind of scrolled ahead and saw that I had a scary amount of questions left. I didn't think I was going to get them done, and I kept plugging away at them, doing the best I could, and the test instructor said, "We have 5 minutes left, and if you don't have time to answer a question, don't leave it blank, put a guess, because a blank is automatic, score against you." And when I tell you I looked at the countdown in the corner of the clock, the corner of the computer screen, and saw them 4 numbers of my parents' address, the most relaxing feeling came over me. I got a smile on my face, and I looked, and I had like 4 questions left. And I knew I was going to be able to finish it. I even said to myself, "Thanks, Dad," I knew he had his hand in that moment. After that, I turned in the test, I went out, I got my score, and not only did I pass the test, I was only one of 2 people in my group that passed it, and I had the highest of the 2 scores. Let me tell you, when I left that union hall, that school, I cried tears of joy. I think I was 35 at the time, and not a super emotional person. I raised kind of tough and didn't show my emotions. When I tell you I cried tears of joy, because my family needed that. Passing that test brought an immediate pay raise, to where I was closer to what my family was accustomed to. That was the first real meaningful time. The second most meaningful time, my mom was in the hospital, going in for her first of what was supposed to be 3 heart surgeries. I was at work because I'd been spending a lot of time up at the hospital, and my sister was there to relieve me. My sister was there the time of her first heart surgery. I got there before she came out and was in recovery. When we walked past the nurse's station, and the scheduling board had my mom's name and the surgery time of, mind you, hospitals use military time, had the numbers of their address. Chills ran up me and my sister's spine, and we knew Dad was watching over Mom, you know. And with my mom's condition, we weren't sure if she was going to make it through the first surgery. She made it through it. The surgery was pretty unsuccessful. They're going to have to go in for an open heart and whatnot, and so on and so forth, without telling you Social Security numbers and everything else, you know. So my mom passed away on March 4th at the time of death that matched my parents' address again. And when I tell you, as hard as it was to lose a mom, the hardest thing I've ever done. I was a mama's boy my whole life. I'm shaking right now just talking about it. To know that on the only day that of the year that is a instruction, March 4th, and paired with the 4 numbers that were their address, it was such a relief to know that my mom was with my dad wholeheartedly, no questions about it. They were united and happy again, and it was a sigh of relief when my mom passed. And I'm not, that can sound bad, you know, not only because I didn't want her to suffer anymore, but because I knew what was supposed to happen happened, you know. Fast forward from that, I, since that date of my mom's passing, we haven't seen them angel numbers near as much. I know they're still watching over me, but they're much more far and few between. The week after my mom passed away, planning the service and all that, I asked her baby brother, my Uncle Bruce, to speak at the funeral. I remember him speaking at my grandparents' funeral, and other than, you know, a nice speech, I didn't expect what we got. What we ended up getting was a eulogy that surpassed the sermon and the service of the pastor at the church. The first time in my life, and I know my mom would have wanted this more than anything, the first eulogy I've ever heard where we were asked, the congregation was asked to accept Jesus into our heart. So, in that moment, I had done that as a kid, you know. I did the baptisms, accepted Jesus in my heart, kind of went through the motions, you know, of being a Christian. But I drifted off course, as many of us do. I repeated them words that day. I accepted Jesus in my heart and decided that, much like I didn't let my dad's death be a waste, so to speak, for lack of a better term, I wasn't going to let my mom's be either. It took me a few weeks, but I slowly started to make it a point to pray every morning on my way to work. From there, I started talking to some friends and getting recommendations for churches. I could have went to my sister's church where my kids attended weekly. I wanted to do this walk on my own, kind of pave my own way. I didn't want to go to my sister's church and be my sister's brother, you know? Not saying that because I dislike my sister. I just wanted to be an individual experience, if that makes sense. I started going to a church, and it was a different vibe than what I was used to. I grew up in, white churches with pews and stained glass windows and, things of that nature. And this was more contemporary, I guess. It was from the outside, it kind of looked like a factory almost, not quite like a factory, but if you know what I mean. It was much more contemporary. No stained glass, no pews. We had chairs set out. I went to church for a few weeks. I missed a week here or there, I went with some friends that invited me. I would go by myself a lot, meet some people, but not being socially awkward. I didn't really meet a whole lot of people right off rip there. And the first time, in that time, me and my wife, we made lots of different lifestyle choices. We've made some changes to our life, and that were more in line with being more godly and purposeful, and basically not sinning because we knew that we'd be like I wasn't going to go and purposely sin because I know that Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins and we'd be forgiven. Wasn't going to give the big guy more work than he already had, Not that he couldn't bear it, but the first time my wife and kids attended my church was actually on a day that we didn't attend church at all. What we did is they had water baptisms at a Christian camp, which ironically was the Christian camp that I went to as a kid. That felt extra special to me, and I wanted to show my kids who have been going to church camps where Dad went when he grew up. And I decided that on that day that I was going to be baptized. Of course, I was baptized as an infant, as many parents do. I highly recommend that. And some people don't agree upon being rebaptized, but to me it was a confirmation of restarting my journey with Christ. What caught me off guard is my oldest child, my son, who grew up in the church. He's more religious than I was at his age. Let me just tell you that. He asked if he could be baptized alongside me, and absolutely, of course I supported him in that. What was super special is my pastor baptized me first and allowed me to help baptize my own son, and that was pretty special, you know. That's something I'm going to cherish for a long time. From that day, my wife and kids started to come to my church more often. My wife is, much like a lot of people watching this, on the fence about spirituality. Not necessarily, you know, a non-believer, just not sure where to connect the dots. She has started to come to church with me occasionally. My kids will come to church with me occasionally. I don't want to take them away from my sister's church where they grew up and they have all their friends. Ironically, some of the friends from that church come to our church for certain events, and that's kind of cool that they, you know, get to see each other at both places. From there, I've been on this journey, and, you know, going to church. So this time, yes, I'm going to church, and life sort of gets in the way. And by that I mean, you know, we have a vehicle breakdown, we have, you know, things in our lives that become financially taxing, and me and my wife both pick up extra jobs, and we're working our lives away, and that depression and anxiety and stress that I had years and years ago started to creep back in. I'll admit I was in a pretty dark place. I had missed church for about a month. I had been going a million miles an hour, forgot to take some medicines and things like that. I was on a fast downward spiral, and I took the time to go to church because I knew I needed a change. And when I tell you, out of everything that we could have read about and learned about, and everything the sermon could have been about, the fact that it was exactly what I needed, and like I said, I've been to counseling and therapy. We have, anybody who's tried to do that knows that, you know, health insurance, you know, co-pays, stuff like that, they get in the way. Sometimes your insurance doesn't cover those kind of appointments at all. It was just something I couldn't really, at the time, afford to get into, and the realization of the fact that almost every corner in every town, okay, maybe not, let me just say this, there's probably as many, if not more, churches in your town than there are Dollar Generals, and everybody knows what I mean by that. And there's no copay, no insurance, they're free to attend, and it is the best counseling that I've received in my experiences. I have tried to begin to surround myself with other like-minded people. I'm a firm believer of, you know, the Bible verse, iron sharpens iron, and the philosophy of the personal development philosophy of you are some of the 5 people that you associate with. I'm trying to associate myself with entrepreneurs and successful businessmen and and Christ, most importantly, Christ grounded minded people, you know. I am going to start going to a men's group at my church that I just recently learned about, and Jesus put it on my heart to challenge myself to grow in the Word of God and read the Bible. And not only read the Bible, but be a disciple and help others read the Bible. And I know some of the videos are messy. I know I'm not a public speaker by any stretch of the imagination. But for a long time, I put off reading the Bible because I didn't feel like, I don't know what I felt. I really don't. I used every excuse in the book, I guess, to not read it. And there's still parts of it I don't understand, you know. But those parts I can ask people, you know, whether it's at the church or I have a brother who is very, very strong, spiritually grounded, role model of mine, and he has walked on this journey with me, and I don't know if I'd be where I am today if it wasn't for him, but spiritually especially, but Jesus put it on my heart to spread the Word of God to others and to, you know, step out of my comfort zone and try to make an impact. I mean, if we end up saving one person or two people, or we get a following, you know, that would be absolutely great. But if we don't, and we just get, you know, a few people watching and a few people listening, and even if you don't follow along through the whole Bible and you watch it, catch a video here or there, and it sparks your life and puts a little excitement for Christ into your heart, that's, you know, the best thing in the world. I've got my children who are, you know, reading the Bible or getting major awards and accomplishments for finishing books in their Awanas program at church. And that's another thing. If you are a parent and you have kids at school are mean, okay? They just are. It's sad what the world, you know, is coming to, but kids are ruthless at school. At church, you don't have that. They still get the interaction. They still get socialized around kids their age, and they have fun nights to keep them entertained. It's not, you know, strict school format, you know. And I highly suggest getting your kids into church and starting them out early. It was kind of cool. I'm not going to get too political on this channel because, you know, I think we need more Jesus in our lives, all of us. We need more Jesus than we do politicians. But this past year, we lost Charlie Kirk, who was a strong advocate for, you know, Christ and very spiritually grounded. I went to my first and definitely not last personal development class, seminar, if you will. And when the celebrities that were there, the likes of Willie Robinson from Duck Dynasty, Tim Tebow, Ed Milet, has a great podcast that I follow. These were people that personally knew Charlie Kirk, and I went to this with my wife the week after he was assassinated, murdered, whatever you want to call it. The spiritual revolution revival, the spiritual movement that happened after that is one of the I'm gonna tell my grandchildren this, one of the coolest experiences I've been in. I saw a packed arena and when asked for people to accept Jesus Christ into their hearts, when I say among the thousands, if not 10,000s of people, that happened on Saturday. On Sunday, all 3 services at our church were standing room only. I followed a line of cars down a busy road that my church is on, and I'd be lying to you if I said if I didn't say every single car on that road turned into my church. It was amazing. I still feel like Jesus Christ is, alive, and obviously, the spiritual movement needs younger generation. We can't let this go away with our grandparents passing, And when I say any one of us, each and every one of us would benefit from having Jesus Christ in our hearts. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's why I'm reading through the Bible and trying to make a kingdom impact. So I just wanted to give a little bit of insight behind the man behind the camera that you guys were listening to, and why my story motivates me to, share with you guys. And I hope that helps you guys understand a little bit about me. And again, if you like to subscribe, and share, I'm looking forward to the journey through the Bible. And beyond that, I'd like to not have it all about this channel all about shoving gospel down your throat. I do want to also, obviously my content is going to be spiritually grounded, but that can be anything from interview with a pastor, or it can be how to see the light through the darkness that is surrounding us. You know, it's a Christian-based. This is a Christian-based personal development page, and I want you all to look back a year from now or 2 years from now and say, I have grown spiritually, I have grown financially, I've grown emotionally, I've grown mentally, and grown financially. So with that, I'm going to cut this short. It's my longest video yet, but it's something that I can talk about and I can be candid. I struggle reading through a book. I stumbled over words. A lot of the names in the Bible are next to impossible to pronounce, but I'm stumbling through it. I'm an average Joe. I have a wife and kids. I have, I would say a 9 to 5, but schedule just changed, and I work 10-hour days and work Saturdays and pick up side work, and I have chores and whatnot. So I'm an average Joe, just like every one of you, and I want to show that you don't have to be anybody special to grow in your relationship with God and challenge yourself to do hard things. Without challenging yourself to do hard things, we're never gonna accomplish much, So with that, I'm gonna end this video, and I want to tell you thank you and God bless.